Ooh, and we are back. Hello, everybody. This is Michelle Hayward and Casey Atha again here on one of our streams where we're discussing diversity, equity, inclusion. Today, we're taking a different vantage point of talking about managing underrepresented people, specifically Black employees. So we I don't know if you Casey and I are social media people. If you haven't figured that out yet, but what we really do is look at how people engage and experiences they share and use them as a way to train people about what goes on in their workplace. So there is this Twitter thread that started a week ago that is still going on, that's like went from Twitter over to Facebook, on LinkedIn. Like, literally, it is what racism looks like so often in the workplace and why it needs to be discussed. And we're going to get into that today. So if Casey wants to start that Twitter thread. So this particular Twitter thread, and I need to adjust it so you can see the very beginning of it, um, was really about a white male employee, and that's my assumption. That's how he identifies. Um, his how he had to manage his direct reports. Like, what happened when he had two direct reports who were Black. And he tells how this has bothered me for a long time, but I've never spoken about it. In my career, I've managed around 20 people or so at various times. Two of those people were Black. I cannot tell you how different my supervisors were toward me about how I managed the Black direct reports. And in it, he goes through and he talks about the scrutiny. He said the level of scrutiny and suspicion I got from my bosses was really striking. If they, meaning the Black reports, called out sick, it was said, "Do you believe them?" If they were away from their desk for 5 minutes, it was, "Where's so and so?" My regular one on ones with my manager, and these were two different people at different organizations, both white though, focused so much on how I needed to supervise these reports more directly. Co-workers too would complain to me about things no one once raised about white co-workers. Every typo, any little slip was treated not as a human error, but as proof this person was not competent for the job. And as we always say, especially in the Black community, you have to be twice as good to get paid half as much. And just the level of scrutiny, and I can so identify with this. One of these individuals I supervised had a health condition which was documented with HR, which I knew the details about because the employee trusted me and chose to tell me. My boss and coworkers regularly expressed doubt about the condition was real. And so he goes on and he tells about how the employee who was sick eventually went on short-term disability, which became long-term disability. But what is really important, I think, what's really important when it comes to racism in the workplace is this key tweet. There was never anything at either job that I would call actionable. No racial slurs, no illegal instructions, just a lot of pressure, a lot of questioning, and doubt about my judgment. It was a real eye opener for me as a white man. So he does identify as a white man. So I did get that right. So, Casey, I'm going to pause here because I want you to discuss your experience being in leadership in an organization. And obviously, this guy appears to be, he was in middle management or supervisor, but not at a leadership level. And just your experience of what it looks like um, when it comes to racism in the workplace.
Thanks, Michelle. So I'll try and keep this as brief as possible, but reading through this, and even now, I can feel it in my body that it's ringing true. It just is, because I've embodied this and I've unfortunately lived this. I have been this person, although I don't identify as a white man. I was in my first organization, and I was a deputy director, and the director, the head person, iced out one of our Black leaders, and he was iced out, and I saw it happening. And then I later was also pushed out in a similar way, but I didn't leave completely. I went to the board of directors, and I realized, I didn't speak up, and I should have, and I wish I would have. And some of these tweets where he talks about why he didn't really resonate with me. And someone even challenged this guy on the Twitter feed, on the Twitter thread, to say, hey, what would you do differently next time? And he said, very genuinely, I hope that I would speak up, but I can't say for sure on a hypothetical. And to me, what that highlights is the real awareness of this person, and the awareness that I also have now, years later, of the fact that there's major power dynamics at play, even when no overtly racist thing is said. We still know what the appropriate way to behave is to stay in the good graces of those in the positions of most power. So it really is, sometimes it feels as though we have to just choose either ourselves or to be an ally and to put ourselves in danger. And it is not often natural to say, I will put myself as the barrier. I will extend my privilege of whatever power I have. It doesn't feel like safe to us, but it is important that we recognize that we are making that choice. We are choosing our safety over being an ally in that moment, and understanding the power dynamics. And the reason I've learned recently is the reason that the decision is so difficult is because we are under the umbrella of white supremacy, where there is no good choice. We either have to sacrifice and put ourselves as a barrier to the harm and possibly take the brunt of it, or we don't and allow the other person to take the brunt of it. So both choices are not great. And that is what happens under the umbrella of white supremacy. And that's why we need to root out racism, which is what allows this to exist, this oppression to exist. So we pull it out by the roots, and that's tough.
I absolutely agree. What I want to go take a step back. What organizations have to do is agree upon what is racist actions and verbiage. And this is not legal terminology. This is racist behavior towards employees who are not white. We're specifically in this case, Black. What does that look like? And I literally can tell you from my personal experience, being a Black person, it was a new college hire. His boss wasn't there. His boss was in a different state, would fly in on Mondays, fly out on Thursdays or Friday mornings. I can't remember right now. So I was helping a college student out. Well, this manager didn't like the fact that I was helping his new hire get acclimated. So he went to my boss. My boss was like, well, you're over there talking to him too much. Like, no, I'm training him to do his job. Well, you shouldn't be over there training him. It wasn't like we were hanging out. It was like I was actually, because I had that job years before. So I was teaching a young man, like, hey, this is how you look at a capital project. This is what the breakdown, like literally teaching him. And he was a civil engineer like me. It was to the point that I was helping him. And when I had to stop, he sat on the other row in a cubicle like me. He would come over to ask me questions like, hey, I can't ask you. You need to ask your boss. He's like, well, he's on a plane. I said, then sit there. And they literally paid this young man an engineer's salary to sit there because his boss was literally flying in from Philly to St. Louis and saying I was disturbing. No, I was asking questions that he wasn't there to ask the guy and helping him so he didn't sit there. Like, you know what? Your boss wants you to sit there. And needless to say, the young man left not too long after I did. But it really showed how I was micromanaged because he didn't want me to train the man on how to do his job. So it comes in so many different ways and so many different levels. So that it does happen. But what I can tell you was that young guy who was an engineer, white guy, actually, he ended up leaving. He ended up not liking his, definitely didn't like the manager. We had that discussion too. But it was quite interesting how that festers through not just your Black employees, but your white employees as well. When they realize what's happening, they don't want to stay as well. No, well, it was in St. Louis, but none of us on that project were from St. Louis. We were from Alabama, Philly, and I'm from South Carolina. So the Philly person reported me to my boss, who was from New Jersey, and the guy that I was helping was actually from Alabama. He's a Bama graduate. So it was none of that. Yeah, it wasn't even St. Louis related. We just the client happened to have an office in St. Louis. So that was the only relevancy to St. Louis. So don't get mad on St. Louis. This is a Philly dude. So you take that for what it is. Okay. So definitely. I will drop the link a little bit later. If you don't do Twitter, there's what they call an unroll of all of the 7 major tweets in here where he tells the story. But once you define what racism looks like, it's truly important in that organization to then step up. And that decision of what it looks like, what it has to start at the top of the organization and go all the way through. Like, this is what racism looks like. This is what we won't tolerate. And literally at every level, people can take action without being fear of retaliation. And that's truly what has to happen in organizations. And people are like, there's an 800 number, and they still are retaliated against. So that's the Pinterest story, right? Where the Black women were doxxed. The person that was harassing it was a white man, was not removed from the organization. Then Pinterest make a national announcement: we support Black Lives Matter. And they're like, really, since when? Because you don't support your Black employees. So there's a whole other discussion on that as well. So we're gonna switch gears a little bit. And what I want to share next is, what is the life cycle? And we're going to do it. This is a broader sense of what that looks like for career wise. Like, what does it look like when you bring in women of color? This one example is women of color specific. And what does that look like when they're brought into the workplace that is racist, and what happens to them? And I can literally, there's a discussion over on Instagram, and this is the post over on Instagram. It's at WOC in STEM Chat. They have a Twitter and an Instagram, but this was actually produced by a nonprofit, by the Safe House Progressive Alliance for Nonviolence. So they did this flow chart: the problem women of color in the workplace. The problem woman of color, in the workplace. Hey, Crystal, thanks for joining. And it talks about, and it depicts that the woman of color enters the organization. White leadership here, it's the honeymoon stage. The woman of color feels welcome, needed, and happy. Then they're the tokenized hire, right? Then reality sets in. The woman of color points out issues within the organization. She tries to work within the organization structure and policies. She pushes for accountability. Remember what I said? We are at the point where allies should be doing this work. Where she should have was points out the issues within the organization. The allies should have picked up everything else. But we're going to go through the whole chart, okay? Repetitive injury and microaggressions, which were described in the Twitter chat. Like, these are the things, like, they're micromanaged, they are followed, they're asked about, well, what are you doing? How long? Well, why is it taking you long? Well, there was a typo. You missed this part. Like, everything is heightened to the nth degree. Then the response: the organization denies, ignores, and blames. The responsibility of fixing the problem is placed on the woman of color. Not today. People of color are pitted against one another. That happened to, I would say that happened to you, Casey. And then deny. So this is where we are: denial of racism. Then we have target and attack. And then they have the retaliation. The organization decides that the woman of color is the problem and targets her. The organization labels the conflict as a communication issue, or claims that she is not qualified or not a good fit. We're not culture fits. Let me get this straight. We are not culture fits. We are culture adds. And what that means is we are not to fit into white culture. We do brighter things. We bring different things to cultures or organizations that are anti-racist, number one. Okay. So then the woman of color exits the organization after being retaliated against. And that's really what the allies are sometimes to the white man. He was like, I might speak up next time. He knows retaliation is real.
Mm-hmm.
And what does that look like? How are you going to get blamed? Are you getting fired? Are they going to severance you out so you don't go back and complain to the EEOC? What does that truly look like for the organization? And it depends on, and this, from the way they're spelling color, is not a US based organization, is my guess, but it's really important to understand the journey. And from this post, this is actually 3 weeks ago. And there are very, and the question was, has this been your journey as a woman of color in STEM? There should be several exit points on this path. And truly there are. Like the microaggressions, exits. The reality that they have issues, exits. When they're selling you something different. Another comment, unfortunately, this is so profound. This is what we need to change. Spot on. Another of the crafty coder. Yep. Yes, indeed. Roller coaster of corporate. So accurate. Thanks for sharing. This is so accurate. This is true at my place of work. I'm legit working on my exit strategy as we speak. Yep, I've definitely had to exit 2 tech organizations for this. So much focus on diversity and not enough support for inclusion. Absolutely. Everybody's focused on increasing their numbers of underrepresented employees, but they're not focused on the fact that their culture is not set up, not created to where they feel welcome, where they feel as though they belong. Like after you get through that honeymoon stage, if there ever is one, this is what happens. Been thinking about speaking up and starting to hold people accountable, but I don't want to lose my job. This is a real issue when it comes to underrepresented employees in the workplace. And what happens, we always say severance package, so like that's a way, to help people out. No, it's a way to silence people. So legislation that says, hey, you can give out severance packages, but you can't silence them from the racial inequity they have encountered in the workplace. And literally that's what severances do. It literally keeps people from that. I've had this several times, exit, left. Yep, exit, left. So it's people that are watching that have had the same experience as well. Casey, did you want to add anything here?
Whew, you said it. There's not much to add. You really covered it. And I think this is a great graphic. And the only thing I would add is that along the way, if you want to be a conscious leader, an ally, then in each of these steps, like take up, like Michelle said, take it up. As soon as the woman of color or the Black woman or the Black person says, hey, here's a problem, say thank you for pointing it out. This is a gift that you have given us. We're not hiring folks who are Black so that they could just come into the organization and then just behave like all the white people. Then what is the point?
Yep.
But that's basically what some of these diversity programs are saying. We want you to come in, we want you to look Black and be Black outwardly, but we want your behaviors to be comfortable for us. And so then what are you doing? What's happening here? You're asking for assimilation. You're asking for folks to leave behind who they are and be more like you so that we can all be comfortable and not have any sort of difficulties. But is that really your goal? Go back to your why. Why do you want diversity then?
Yep.
That's
because your competition is doing well. Why is your competition doing well? It really interests me when I talk to some employers, especially when it talks about engineers, scientists, technologists. And it's like, well, the numbers are so low, like it's only 3% of Black women. There are 4% of Latinas who have STEM degrees. I say, well, how many is that? And they can't tell me how many it is. right? As like, so is that 100,000 or is that 100 million? And they're so focused on the number being so small. And so when I tell them between 2004 and 2014, for all physical sciences, math, engineering, um, computer science, there were literally about 400,000 Latina, Black, and Indigenous women who finished with a Bachelor of Science degree. But you can't find one out of 400,000. That the issue isn't the percentage. The issue is the person you see in the mirror. And so it really takes you taking a hard look at your conscious biases. There aren't unconscious, your conscious biases as to why you're stuck on a percentage and not looking at the totality of those numbers. And then really, what is that like in your hiring process? So we're gonna go back. It's one more graphic I want to share today that focuses on Black workers and white workers. And I'm gonna let you leave with this because this is the one you found.
Oh.
And I was like, wait, what?
Right,
and we, here we go. So this is a screenshot. So you can talk about this one. I found the other ones, but this one's yours.
Yeah. So this sort of preceded the one you found. I actually like the one you found because it gives more narrative, and I am into storytelling. So yes, this is actually the predecessor I found in a journal article. And Michelle specifically, I thought of when I saw this, and I sent it to her right away because she works specifically, Positive Hire is working to get Black women in leadership positions. And I'm thinking, okay, well, once these women are in the organization, obviously they leave and they don't make it to the top, and why? And this basically is the simplest form of showing why. So white workers are typically born, they seek their job, they're hired, and they're not monitored, and then they just climb the ladder. And so when folks say, you know what, why don't you just come in at the bottom and work your way up? Well, this is why. Look at the second graphic. Because when, let's say, a Black worker is born, seeks a job, is hired, then is over monitored. Think about the Twitter thread we just talked about. Guess what? They're fired. Boom, got to go back to the job seeking. And you're in that circle until you find some break in the system where maybe you get promoted. And then once you're promoted, you're expected to behave like your peers, your management peers, to keep everyone down and acting in that good fit way.
Exactly.
So to me, I really like the simplicity of this. It really shows and answers the question, okay, what is going on? We're finally getting folks in and getting more diversity, but then the attrition, there's a lack of retention, or they're not climbing the ladder. And then the temptation is to blame the individual instead of looking at the system and looking at the patterns that are arising.
And I absolutely agree with this. We see a lot, especially in tech with this, having to exit the microaggressions they encounter, the racism at a heightened level, because it's in every industry, but it's really heightened in tech. So, and it's really important to understand and look at that cycle. And literally, organizations have this data. They know what it looks like. They know what their attrition rate is broken out, right? And I think you talked about it with a former client at some point, may have not looked at their data. And you say, if you look at your data, you'll see where your attrition is, and you can break it down. And you told them exactly where they were going to find their attrition. And it was with Black women. And it was like, how did you know that? And because you know what systemic racism is, and you knew you had been in that organization and you could point it out. And because you understood that, you were able to tell them where to go and find their data to prove to them you're not where you thought you were and how much more work you have to do. And that's the same thing I do with other people, with clients, is having them look at their data. And too often they want to hide behind their legal, but it doesn't change your culture. It doesn't push you ahead. It literally is baked so far into the organization. And, you know, I thought about, there is one other Instagram. I know we're going to get out of here in a few minutes, but there is one other Instagram post on this same account that I want to share, because people's like, oh, we're leveling the playing field, or they have the same opportunity as everyone else. And really, what it looks like is this. And this is one of my, are you sharing it? Okay, let me stop this share. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. It's not
I had the
sharing.
old share up. Give me
Yeah,
that
okay.
new one.
So we have a new share up, and literally
Yeah.
it says, what's the matter? It's the same distance. Two barriers. You got a ball and chain, landmines, barbed wire, an alligator pit, a wall, spears within a pit. Like, yeah, but it's the same distance. And these are literally the career barriers in corporate consistently being encountered. And as you can see, there are no safeguards. There are no people there like, hey, I've been here. Let me cover up the barbed wire for you. Hey, I'll distract the alligator for you. Literally, as a Black woman, this is what you're trying to do every single day when you go into corporate. And it is very, very difficult. It's very tiring. And it leads to so many different issues for us mentally, emotionally, and physically. So what I want to say is, if your organization is looking to or working towards becoming anti-racist, you have to identify in your organization, what is your alligator pit, what is your barbed wire, what are your minefields, and that oftentimes has already been told to you via HR complaints. Sometimes, well, not all the time, because HR doesn't work for the people; it works for the company. It protects the company, right? It may be told definitely in your EEOC complaints. And that is where you need to dig in, as well as your data for your attrition, where your highest offices, your managers that have the highest turnover for your underrepresented employees. And that's truly where you need to focus and start understanding what's driving that, what systemic racism you have in your organization that is driving this. Casey, anything you want to add?
No, I think you did a great job.
Yeah, so I love using social, and social I can find different graphics that tell a story. And when you sit there and you break it down, especially as DEI or diversity, equity, inclusion consultants, bringing those in sometimes really brings about a different aspect and a different perspective to teach on, and to get people to really think about what's going on in their workplace, previous workplaces, and their conscious biases, not their conscious biases. So that is what I have for this week. Casey, I'll let you wrap up.
All right. So I would only say that I think it's really important that whenever you see some pattern happening, it's painful to sometimes put the mirror up, but look at the information. And when you do that, do it intersectionally. Do not just look at men, women, look at race, but look at women who are Black, women who are queer and Black, women who are queer, Black, and having some other marginalized identity. So think about that. Dig deeper. These are different types of experiences that different types of people have. And when you dig in, maybe you could listen in such a way that you just ask, hey, how can we ruin this whole hiring process for a Black trans woman?
Yep.
How could we do it? Solicit that advice, not your experience, but what are all the different ways that we can ruin this hiring experience or promoting experience? Proactively say, what are the mistakes we could possibly do? And then make sure that you do something so that you don't do those things.
Exactly.
So that's my little tip. That's my little nugget.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us for another DEI Thursday. Maybe we should call it DEI Thursday. I don't know. We got to come up with a name.
Yeah.
But we will be back next week, Thursday. Probably not with a lot of social media graphics, storytelling, but I like using social because people share and we get different perspectives and experiences. And again, it becomes easier sometimes to teach racism and anti-racism and understanding what Black employees encounter in the workplace. And coming up in July, we're going to have a special guest So Casey, not July, I'm sorry, in August. I know it's like, wait, we're in July now, but in August, we're going to have a special guest who's literally studying Black men in corporate America. So he's on the other side for me. So met him over 10 years ago, but he is literally studying the Black men in corporate America and what that looks like. So can't wait to have y'all meet him and hear about his work. So it's part of his dissertation. So thank you everybody for joining. We will see you next week. Bye.
Bye.